probably won't be one of the most exciting or interesting videos that I've made, and it probably won't be one of the ones that gets the juices flowing the most, because it's not really going to act as any kind of a clarion call to any particular side in any argument, really. And it's probably one of the least sketched out videos that I've had. I've returned from work, I've thought about what I wanted to say on the way home, and the reason that I've done that is because it's actually a video that I probably couldn't have made yesterday, because it's on the back of perhaps personal revelation would be a little too strong a term. That would be a little bit pompous and overblown. Not that I shirk away from hyperbole most of the time, but a little bit overblown. But certainly a sort of moment of enlightenment in terms of my position on certain things, or looking at how my positions fit together. That's something that I have a real interest in, how different aspects of my worldview fit together and whether it's cogent the way in which they fit together. So let me try and give you an idea of what I'm talking about. There's something I need to clear up, I think, right from the start, and this is this idea that we're talking about these campaigns that are portrayed, that are misportrayed, or certainly in terms of the examples that I've seen as campaigns teaching men not to rape. Let me say it right here and now, because I'm getting a little bit pissed off with having it thrown back at me. That if it was a campaign glibly and simply telling men not to rape, then I would have no time for that. That just seems a ridiculous, not a worthwhile campaign, not a worthwhile exercise in allocating human and monetary resources, and actually a little bit unnecessarily insulting, okay? But the campaigns that I have seen, they're often portrayed as that, but they're misportrayed as that, strangely even by the people who champion the campaigns, which probably shows just how wide of the mark they are in many respects. The campaigns that I have seen, they might be portrayed as that, but what they actually involve is trying to highlight for people the limits and the extent of what constitutes consent. That's what it's about, and trying to enable people, perhaps it applies to younger people more than anybody else, in part because younger people are sometimes they've got a little bit less life experience on these things, and partly because young people tend to get in these circumstances more because they have more exciting lives. And so both for the benefit of those younger people and for the benefit of other younger people, I think there's a pragmatic case to be made that some of these campaigns are worthwhile. But I just want to make the point that these are not, or the ones that I've seen that I agree with as being worthwhile, are not simply this glib idea of teaching men not to rape. Okay, I'm pleased I got that across. Now, what I want to do is to take you back to a discussion, or a series of discussions that took place on Free Thought blogs between myself and other people, to highlight some differences, and then you'll see where this kicks in a minute. I had a discussion over at Free Thought blogs some time ago. Remember, I've been banned for quite some considerable time there, discussing, we got onto a side issue. It wasn't the main issue of the thread, but we got onto this issue where I talked about my position, principled position, generally with regard to employment, which is that you treat people as individuals. You don't treat an applicant as a male applicant or a female applicant. Consequently, the idea that there are jobs that should be unavailable to men and unavailable to women is anathema to me. I have no time for that, with one exception. And I said it previously, it's not that I can't be moved by an argument that I'm totally dyed in the wool. Previously, there'd been two such jobs. One of them was midwifery, which I didn't think was an appropriate job for reasons I won't go into now for a man. But that in the last 2 or 3 years, arguments have been made. I've heard people say things which had changed my perspective on that. But one job still remained, and that was certain frontline infantry positions, not because of any aspect of capacity in terms of female applicants, although every time it was thrown back at me, and it was thrown back at me with fervour, even weeks down the line in other threads, it was always in terms of, you don't think women are physically strong enough to be infantry soldiers. That was never what I said, but of course over at Free Thought Blogs, housed by out-and-out trolls, as it pretty much is, you don't let facts and an honest portrayal of somebody's position get in the way of making a despicable quote mining mockery of them, as they try and do over there. But the point was that it was to do with an issue of stress fractures, specifically, that there's some evidence, and it seemed to me pretty good evidence, that in these positions that require large loads to be yomped over long distances as part and parcel of the role, the incidence of stress fractures amongst female soldiers was many times what it was amongst male soldiers, and of course that has a practical impact on the military. You can't afford to have people, if you send a load of soldiers and they've got to yomp 60 mile with a pack on the back, you can't afford to have a large number of them dropping out with stress fractures in active service. You also couldn't afford financially to run an army on those terms. Surely there's a huge financial impact there. That was my argument. Whether you agree with that argument or not isn't really important. The point was that there was a practical, pragmatic argument that I'd made there that I earnestly and honestly hold. It was a pragmatic argument, and I was shot down in flames from people who had this principled position, and as far as they were concerned, the principle was the be-all and end-all and everything, which is that whatever the circumstances, you have to treat men and women identically. Forget about the fact that they're men and women. You've got to treat them as individuals, and so that has to apply to all these different occupational spheres. You cannot have an exception. As an aside to that little discussion, and I'll tell you about this because it's amused me, and I don't think it's one I've ever brought up in a video at the time. I made, in several of my responses, I pointed out to them that, well, okay, if that's how you feel, I have to point out that in the UK and in America, the entry requirements for women to join the armed forces, the army particularly in this case, are lower than they are for men. So surely you must be equally annoyed and effused about that as you are about this thing that I'm brought up. And the interesting thing is, when I used to post on Free Thought Blogs there, everything I ever brought up was pounced upon. Nothing was, no bone was ever left ungnawed. And yet, despite me bringing that up several times, every time I brought it up, all I ever got in response to that part of it was absolute radio silence. None of them were prepared to say, yeah, that's wrong as well. It should be the same tests for everybody. Seemingly that they were happy with that discrepancy there, that kind of discrimination, presumably on pragmatic grounds, but they weren't happy with it on the grounds that I was saying. But aside from that then, so they had this principled approach there, which they held with a fervour. Then when we look at these examples of these things that I'm actually agreeing in the main now with people on that Free Thought blog side of the argument, let's describe it as that, over these campaigns, which is to increase young people, young men especially, the understanding of young men with regard to the boundaries of what constitutes consent, and also, of course, the implications if they step over those boundaries, not just to the other person involved, but to themselves. They seem to take an entirely different approach. Now, the idea of gender neutrality goes out the window, and they will say, well, the majority of rapes are carried out by men. The majority of victims of rape are women. So it makes sense to target men. It makes sense not to have gender neutral adverts and campaigns. It makes sense to portray the man, in this instance, in a lot of these things, as the aggressor, if you like, and the woman as the victim, because that will have the greatest impact, that will have the greatest effect. Practically speaking, that will probably cause a greater reduction in the incidence of rape than if there were a gender neutral approach that didn't hit any group particularly with the same amount of impact. You might not agree with that argument. That's fine if you don't. That doesn't really matter. But the fact is, that's what they think. and they was happy there to get rid of the principles, bollocks to your principles of gender neutrality. We're embracing the pragmatic argument here, and we're embracing it now with a fervour. And anybody who says anything else is a discussing misogynist MRA rape apologist. Okay, so that's their principle. They've, on the one point, it was the principled argument with this army thing. Now it's the pragmatic approach, both being held with equal fervour. So that's that side. Then on the other side, since my last video, I've had a number of people in the comments, even the PMs, and the PM is part of what led to this little mini revelation that's made this video, have contacted me and said, I don't agree with you, Jim. I normally agree with you on most things, but I think you're wrong on this. This should be a gender neutral campaign. You know, men can be victims of rape too. Women can be the aggressors. They can be the guilty party. They can be the party that's committing the sexual assault or the rape. Women need to know about issues of consent as well. It doesn't matter that they might be in the minority of instances. It should be a gender neutral approach. And of course, women, I agree that there are many instances that women overstep the mark, that they do need perhaps educating on issues of consent. I've only been at a Butlins 80s weekend this weekend. An example there, one of the guys' fancy dress I was with, he dressed as Tarzan with a little loincloth made out of 2 chamois leathers. Numerous women came up to him in the night, lifted up his chamois leather to see if he had any underwear on underneath, to see if they could grab a glimpse of a bit of cock or whatever, pinching his arse, grabbing hold of him. Seemingly, from their perspective, a bit of fun. What harm can be done? This is a guy, you know, it's all a bit of fun. We all know that if the situation was reversed and that was a female companion I'd been with and she was in fancy dress with a small skirt and guys were lifting her skirt up and seeing if they could grab a little bit of minge viewing there, that would be seen as utterly unacceptable and certainly not a bit of fun, even if they intended it as a bit of fun. So yeah, there are those issues there. And what these people are saying is that, well, so it doesn't really matter that the majority, even if some of them dispute this, but even if the majority of rapists are men and even if the majority of victims are women, so what? This is the principle of it, which is that the issue of consent, we all should be treated as individuals. It's individuals, after all, who are raped. It's individuals who caused rape, and those individuals in both cases can be male or female. So the arguments must be gender neutral. That's the principled approach, and that's the argument that they have with me. I'm taking a pragmatic approach. They want the principled approach. This is the bet that I'm going to make. Could be wrong in some cases. I'm pressing the gamble button now, which pisses people off, but I'm pressing it. There's some of those people who take that principled approach on that non-FTB side of the argument. If I was to, on another day, bring them my argument, as I just have now, in fact, they've probably just heard it, some of them, with regard to these infantry positions, they wouldn't say, well, no, Jim, you're wrong. It's a principle of a position. It doesn't matter if we allow women in the infantry, if the incidence of these stress fractures go through the roof. It doesn't matter how much it affects occupational efficiency. It doesn't matter if it costs the army an arm and a fucking leg in payouts because they're getting sued because they have a duty of care to their employees and they're putting people in an environment with an untenable level of risk. It doesn't matter. The principle is gender neutrality, and so if a woman can pass the tests to get in, which don't include some kind of bone bloody strength test, obviously, because that's not a test that's available. If they pass the tests, then they should get in. I don't think many of them would make that argument. I think they would accept my pragmatic argument and would accept it quite readily. So here's the point. You have people on one side who fervently back up principled arguments when it suits, when it seems right to them, fervently back up pragmatic arguments similarly when it seems appropriate to them, and won't countenance the alternatives. On the other side, you have exactly the same thing. And This is the revelation for me today, which is I hadn't put my arguments alongside one another in these instances and saying, well, actually, sometimes I take a principled approach, as I do outside of this one specific case of infantry persons. Outside of that, in the rest of the sphere of employment, I take a principled position, even if sometimes it's not entirely practical, even if sometimes it would make sense to say, well, the vast majority of people that want to go into midwifery are female. Maybe the practical thing is not to cater for the odd man who wants to do it, but to say, no, there is a principle involved. So sometimes I'll take the principled and sometimes I will take the pragmatic in terms of these other things that I've just discussed. So I don't think there's anything wrong in that. I don't think there's anything to be gained from somebody. If you were always pragmatic, then you had no principles on which to hang your arguments. I don't see how that could be a good thing. Surely we need principles and we need principled approaches, but we also need to know where those principles extend and where they overextend, and the damage that's caused if we overextend principles, and the way in which that can stop us achieving, let's say, the best value outcome in terms of human and monetary resources. So there's nothing wrong in that balance, but what I see sometimes is too much dogmatism. And that's from everybody, and that includes myself, and that some of these arguments get quite heated when, for all the right reasons, one side is promoting a pragmatic approach to achieve the best solution, and the other side is promoting a principled approach, often based on principles that we all share. Well, look, these are the kind of videos that every fucker hates apart from me. I think because, I don't know, everybody gets a little bit of I have a pop at sort of everybody, I suppose, in this instance, including myself. So I apologise for that, and I thank you more than I always say thank you for watching this video. But thank you for watching this one, if you have watched this one all the way through, because it was just one that I really wanted to get off my chest. Why? I think mainly because it's perhaps something that's just occurred to me a little bit as the way that I look at things, perhaps a little bit inconsistently in the way that I judge things, but that isn't necessarily a bad thing, and so that I shouldn't necessarily assume it's a bad thing when other people do the same, as long as they can justify on what grounds they're doing it, as long as the pragmatic argument does make enough sense, I suppose, to trump the underlying principle. Okay, well, thank you for watching, really. Thank you, and bye for now.